Well, good morning, everyone. Such a beautiful spring morning, getting to be summer, right? Probably few of you have ever planted a wheat field, huh? Unless you're from the Midwest. But have you ever planted a simple garden? I know a few of you have. I've seen your gardens. If you have, you know that when you plant beans or petunias, you get beans and petunias, right? If you plant cucumbers, you get cucumbers. But you also get something else, especially in New Orleans. What do we always get in our gardens? Weeds, tares, they call them in the Bible. It's interesting that no matter what we seem to plant, we somehow manage to get weeds too. I bring this up because I believe in what is sometimes referred to as the law of correspondence. This law says that the same laws in the universe exist in seemingly different aspects of life. They work in the same way, exactly, but they manifest in areas that seem unrelated. In particular, I believe that the laws that function in physical nature are the same laws that function at the mental level and even at the spiritual level in different ways, but using the exact same principles. The point I'm making is that there is a mental counterpart to this process of growing plants and vegetables and the accompanying weeds. For example, as we sow, so shall we reap. We've all heard that. We know that is karma. On the physical level, we're working in our garden maybe, but the same principles work on the mental level too. We know that whatever we sow in our minds, we certainly as Unity students know that, so shall we reap in our lives. As we think, so it is. However, we not only reap what we sow, but we also can reap weeds. In life too, we all have weed experiences. The seeds that we sow are the thoughts that we implant into our consciousness. The plants we grow are the things we manifest in our lives because of that, based on these thoughts. The weeds that come up are those experiences that we don't want, the things that happen that we did not plant, but they sprouted anyway. Those are our weeds. Looking at you, I can tell you all have had that experience. I'd like to illustrate my point with a story, which to me is a metaphor for life and those best made plans of mice and men. It's supposed to be a true story. I can't even imagine. There was a bricklayer's apprentice named Charlie. His team had just finished a 3-story building, and Charlie was up on the 3rd story, and there were quite a few bricks left up there on the 3rd story, and Charlie's boss told him, "It's up to you to bring all those bricks back down to the ground." Now, Charlie looked at them, and he didn't feel like carrying them back down 2 by 2. It had been a lot of trouble getting them up there in the first place, and he sure didn't look forward to bringing them back down. Now, Charlie was a rather creative guy, so he thought of a way to get the bricks down, which would be much easier than carrying them up had been. Charlie looked around, saw an empty wheelbarrow. He also noticed that the carpenters hadn't yet cut the beams off of the roof. And bingo, a light goes off in his head. He devises a plan. He puts a pulley up on the beam that extended from the roof. Then he takes a rope and he threads it through the pulley and ties it to the barrel. He then tells the others what he's going to do. I'm going to take this barrel and put it on the top floor, and then I'll get down on the ground and I'll hold the rope. You fill the barrel up there with bricks and let the barrel go. And then I'll lower it and take the bricks and hoist the barrel back up. And we'll repeat the process. Isn't that much easier than carrying them down 2 by 2, 3 flights of stairs? Charlie's boss pipes in and says, "Pick them up and carry them, Charlie." Charlie answered, "It's going to work, sir. Trust me." So Charlie got the barrel up on the 3rd floor, and he got down on the ground and he held the rope. Someone put the bricks in the barrel for him. Charlie held onto the rope really tight and yelled, "Okay, give the barrel a shove." They did, and the law of physics went into effect. But Charlie weighed 150 pounds, and the barrel of bricks weighed 200 pounds. As his friend pushed the barrel of bricks out the window, down came the bricks, and up came Charlie. About halfway through the journey, the barrel of bricks and Charlie met, causing Charlie great pain in the head. The bricks continued down to the ground, and Charlie continued up until he was introduced to that beam up there that was extending over the top of the building. The bricks hit the ground. In fact, the force was so great that it knocked the bottom of the barrel out. So here's Charlie, who weighs 150 pounds, and the barrel, without any bricks, weighs now 10 pounds. So the barrel started back up, and Charlie started down. And halfway in between, Charlie was reintroduced to the barrel, this time causing pain to his feet and ankles. So Charlie continued down. He landed on the big pile of bricks, at which point he finally let go of the rope. Now the barrel weighed 10 pounds, and there was nothing at the other end of the rope at this point. So the barrel started coming back down. The barrel happened on Charlie, boom, on the ground, snugly fit right over Charlie's shoulders. His boss heard all that commotion and came running downstairs just in time to see Charlie sitting on the pile of bricks, wearing a barrel. Charlie got up and smiled sheepishly and said, "See, I told you it would work." Well, not too many of us have had an experience or experiences quite that dramatic, but I think we can all empathize with Charlie and understand the situation. We talk about the best laid plans of mice and men, but have you ever had that experience where you've prayed, you've planned, you've dreamed, you've done everything possible you needed to get something done, and it got done, but you also reaped a lot of weeds in the process. A lot of unnecessary pain came along with it. That seems to me to be the nature of many of our experiences. Life is sort of a mixture of the good news, bad news type of situation, the bittersweet, as they call it. We have our successes, we have our failures, but we seldom really have 100% success or 100% failure. There's a melange of the two. Pleasure and pain often seem to be intricately intertwined. We can usually see the reasons, of course, for our successes, but we seldom see or anticipate the reasons for our problems. It's kind of like raising children. I'm sure most of you are well aware when things go great and your kids receive some honor or award or do something you're very proud of. You say, "Of course, look how I raised them. What do you expect?" But then when they get in trouble, you say, "Well, maybe it's a past life experience coming forth or something." We pray for, we plan for success, and we usually get it. We certainly don't plan for and pray for pain and failure, but sometimes we do get it. We all get it. Why is that? Let's go back to our garden analogy again. I believe the principles that work in the garden also work in our life. It's a different level, but it's the same laws, the same universe, the same oneness. There's a correspondence at all levels of life. In the garden analogy, if we plant beans, we get beans, but we also get weeds. Where do they come from? We know where the beans come from, but where do the weeds come from? Think about that, because we're going to associate it with life. We don't buy a packet of weed seeds, do we? Well, there's probably two places where these weed seeds come from. First, the weeds may already be in the soil, of course, before we even plant our beans. Number two, they just come right out of the air. They may be carried by the wind or birds or animals, whatever. They are, in essence, in the air most of the time. The weed seeds that are already in the soil when you plant whatever you've planted are analogous to our erroneous beliefs, the negative thoughts and feelings that are already in our subconscious mind. In other words, the old tapes, conditioning, fears, guilt, anger that are lingering there in our subconscious mind. They're already there. We may plant seeds of success, and those seeds of success will grow and they'll blossom in our life. But in the same process, very often, those old fears, angers, and hurts manifest too when certain things happen in our lives. So number one, the weed seeds may already be in our subconscious mind. I believe that most of us carry within us these kinds of weed seeds. They often manifest without our even realizing it, especially childhood impressions of ourselves or of other aspects of life that just keep popping up. Maybe the way we view certain countries or religions or people or political parties. They've been programmed in there and they just keep coming out. We didn't put them there. The second kind of weed seeds can come out of the air, like we said. Now, the weed seeds from the air would be analogous to our picking up false ideas and negative beliefs from other people, maybe our social circle or the media or social media or on the job. Those are examples of the weed seeds that we can pick up from outside influences. Or maybe when Charlie's boss told him, "Oh, your idea will never work," Charlie unknowingly accepted that. We often do that when we're children. The weed seeds will just keep sprouting back up again and again. Cutting the weeds down, when you think about how the whole process works of getting rid of these weed seeds, there is the time when there's a harvest. Now, ordinarily, and in the Bible, they talk about in a story of the weeds and the tares, how the people ask if they should cut down those weeds and pull them out first. And they were told no, because the weeds, the tares, the wheat and the tares, they were intricately tied up at the root with the wheat. And if you pull out the tares, you're also going to pull out the wheat. So you can't do that. You've got to let them keep growing. And that is the same way it is with us when you think about it psychologically. We can't always just pull out the weeds in our lives, and that would be analogous to pretending they're not there, pretending we're not suffering or something. So cutting the weeds down is analogous to solving our problems with things like maybe denying them or trying to change somebody else on the outside, which rarely works. But we often try to control other people and events so that they'll fit our idea of reality. Now, when we try to manipulate the outside reality out there, or our environment, or maybe leave certain people or situations, we all know it rarely works unless there's a change in our consciousness inside. We'll keep on attracting other people and situations just like the dandelions that grow in front of all of our houses. So how do we permanently get rid of the weeds in our consciousness? This is one of the basic themes of Course of Miracles, is that we will keep attracting to us the people and the situations in our lives that cause us the same problems, that trigger us in the same way, until we finally learn that it's us and that we're being triggered. And so the point is, don't ever suppress anything. Look at it. Now let's refer to the Bible story about the tares and the wheat. A man owned a wheat field, and in his field he sowed good seeds. Then at night, what happened? An enemy came along and sowed weeds. To us, that may sound kind of far-fetched, but believe it or not, that was not at all uncommon back in biblical times. When the neighbors were feuding, that's what they did. That was one way of getting revenge, going on the property at night and sowing weeds or tares in the grain fields. So there's a basis, in fact, for that story in the Bible. The farmer discovers that there are weeds along with his wheat. His helpers ask, and this is a direct quote, "Should we go out and pull up the weeds?" The wise farmer says, "No, don't do that, because the tares are a type of weed which actually intertwine with the wheat roots. So pick up," what they decided to do was to pick up the weed seeds first, then some kind of, in other words, the weed seeds were the poisonous ideas, and analogous to, in our life, those poisonous thoughts or ideas that come in from a psychic atmosphere. But the big question is, how do we get rid of our weed experiences? If it's analogous to this story, which is the whole meaning of the story, not to pull the tares out, what do we do about those tares? What happens if you go out in your garden and you cut the weeds down with your shears? What happens? Or if it's kind of like getting a lawnmower and cutting all the dandelions in your front yard. How many hours does it take before your front yard is full of dandelions again? About 12 at mine. So cutting the weeds is analogous to what we do when we try to solve our weed experiences purely in the outer sense, without changing our consciousness. When we try to solve our problems or cure our ills by manipulating other people or things in the outer world without making inner changes, it's kind of like cutting those dandelions down. It works for a while. We might change jobs, get away from the person, but the dandelions grow back. We'll attract that situation again. They might be gone temporarily, but before long, they'll be right back in your personal lives. They'll appear again in another situation or another person. Well, what do we do about them? The answer is not cutting the weeds down. If we're supposed to let them grow, as it says in the Bible, what do? Well, the farmer said, "No, let it go. When it's time to harvest the wheat, the first thing we'll do is to harvest the weeds. Then we'll burn them. Then we'll harvest the wheat and store it in the barn." That's Matthew 13:24. What does that mean? Very, very deep psychological meaning. There is a tremendous lesson here. The man sowing good seeds in his field represents the process of sowing ideas of truth in our mind, in our consciousness. When we, through affirmation or prayer or meditation, sow seeds of truth in our subconscious mind, that's what we're working on. When we say, for example, which many of you do, "I am a whole and perfect child of God." And when we meditate on and affirm that, it's sowing good seeds. The soil in our garden and our subconscious mind are very analogous. The subconscious is where the seeds that we sow grow. But sometimes, as in the parable, the enemy comes along and sows weeds. If truth is our goal, then the enemy is that which is not truth. All the negative stuff we get in life, erroneous false beliefs. Our enemy is not in the form of a devil or a neighbor or a country. Our enemy is simply false beliefs, maybe ignorance or darkness. So the enemy that sows the weeds are the false beliefs that we accept in our subconscious mind. Often we've accepted those since we're little children. Someone once said, "It ain't what you don't know that hurts you, it's what you do know that ain't so." It ain't what you don't know that hurts you, it's what you do know that ain't so. Those are the weed seeds, the false beliefs that we gather in our minds. In the Bible story, weed seeds were sowed while men were sleeping. Sleeping refers to a state of unawareness. That's the metaphysical meaning of it in the Bible. That's when we accept our weed seeds, when we're unaware. We're just not thinking about it. We unknowingly accept false beliefs and prejudices and negative ideas from other people. So when we're sleeping, that is when we're unaware, is the time when the weed seeds are sown, and eventually they will begin to manifest in our lives. That's one reason why so many different spiritual schools emphasize that being very present, very aware is the bottom line for starting spiritual development. And of course, that's why meditation is so important. So in the biblical story, the plants begin to bear wheat. Okay, this represents the manifestation, the actually coming into physical being of the ideas that we have sown. In the Bible story, the farmer's assistant asked, should we go out and gather the tares, the weeds? Remember, the farmer said, no, lest you root up the wheat too. If you gather the weeds at this time, you'll also root up the wheat. Let both of them grow together, and at the harvest time we'll gather the weeds and burn them. Then we'll gather the wheat, and we'll put the wheat in the barn. And that's the crux of the lesson, the very heart of it. Let's look at what that means to you. Let's take pulling out the weeds. If we pull the weeds before the harvest, we will root up the wheat too. We'll destroy what we want. That is, if you try to destroy the weeds too early, you destroy the wheat too. Pulling up the weeds before the harvest is analogous to resisting our experiences, trying to fight them or suppress our emotions. When we try to suppress or manipulate our feelings, we are pulling up the weeds, but we're destroying the wheat along with it. Anytime we suppress, repress, resist, or try to escape from any experience that we're having, we are repressing not only the negative, the weeds, but also the positive, the wheat. The positive is what we can learn from, the experience, that if we sit with it, that we can permanently learn and change from, not escape it. That is not the way we grow. We just mainly suffer them. Anytime we suppress our feelings of fear or anger or sadness or whatever feelings we have, which is what a lot of people spend their lives doing, along with suppressing those negative feelings, we're also suppressing all feelings. That's just the way it works, even the joy and love feelings. When we pull up those weeds, we're trying to selectively filter our life experiences, what we experience in the world. We're trying to selectively filter the way people are and the way we are and the way we relate to them. In other words, we're trying to escape reality. Every time we do that, we're not pulling up just the weeds, we're also pulling up the wheat, the good things in our lives. We're suppressing our emotions. If we're afraid to experience failure or maybe other people's weedy personalities, then we're never going to experience the success of overcoming whatever life is seeming to manifest. If we're afraid to experience our pain, we'll never really live life fully. We'll only be half alive. The lesson is to non-resist. You hear a lot about non-resistance these days. That's the lesson, non-resistance to what seems to be negative or evil, to allow ourselves to have that experience and to live life fully, whatever seems to be happening, and eventually learn that in reality there is nothing to be negative about or to fear. If we sit with it long enough, we will start to realize that. We are here to live life fully, to accept whatever seems to be happening. We need to learn to accept our wheat and our tares equally, to recognize that both are part of the life experience. We can't live in fear of weeds, and the truth is that we can learn to live with them and to deal with them and to understand them and eventually not to be affected by them if we'll be present to them. For example, maybe someone at work is constantly competitive, negative, or unfair. We can try to manipulate them. Doesn't work very well. We can keep changing jobs, hoping to find one that doesn't have people like that. Good luck. But we can also learn to understand that people like that are not to be feared or resisted, but simply understood. They know not what they do. We also need to realize and remember that why we got triggered by them in the first place has very little to do with them and much to do with us. Often our childhood experiences. If we work with that pain enough, eventually we won't be triggered by those same situations. We'll be free. That is analogous to living with the weeds until harvest time, being with them and then burning them up. That's what the farmer said to do with the weeds. Like we do with our problems, sort of at the burning bowl ceremony at New Year's time. So in the Bible parable, they burned the weeds at harvest time, but they put the wheat in the barn. What is meant by that? The harvest time is when we gain from each experience, each lesson. That's what life is about. We accept our anger or our hurt or our fear. Then maybe we start to realize that the situation or the person we're dealing with reminds us of someone in our childhood who deeply hurt us. We realize that our emotions have little to do with our present situation. Winky was just telling me this morning, Dr. Phil was explaining how someone who was a hoarder because her father left her and the family when she was young, and so she just never wanted to lose anything. It all goes back to that. Why we suffer has very little to do with the present situation or person, but everything to do with what they trigger in us. Then we gain power over our lives. Maybe we never again have to fear or be mad or sad about that particular situation. The harvest time is when we reap the pure essence of our experience. We figure out how to use the experience as grist for the mill, so we'll never be affected by someone or something like that again. We will know that if someone takes credit for what we do on the job and we feel mad or sad, it is reminding us of when we felt helpless as a child in a similar situation. And we realize that this is no longer the case. We're adults. We don't need to stress out about that anymore. Perhaps we take steps to do something about it, but we don't need to suffer emotionally because of it anymore. From every experience we have here on earth, there is a lesson for us to learn. Every person and experience can be our teacher. Life on earth is a classroom, and every experience we have can be a lesson in that classroom. So at harvest time, we harvest the tares first, and we burn them. Then we put the wheat in the barn. This means that we stock up on future nourishment because that's going to feed us sometime in the future. The wheat represents our successes and our positive experiences. Putting the wheat in the barn means that we take our positive experiences, we store them in our memory, and we start building on them, and they will nourish us in the future. And thus, it will give us more and more faith because we've experienced the miracle. The whole idea of the parable is non-resistance when we're having a weed experience. And then afterwards, when we reflect on the experience, we use our spiritual discernment to burn the weeds, to get rid of that negative, unwanted manifestation, and then to store successes in our memory, in the barn. Every day we're experiencing some wheat experiences and some weed experiences. In your daily meditation, allow that process to take place. Realize what's bothering you. Ask Spirit to show you what tares or weeds you need to burn up in the future. And that's the story of the wheat and the tares. Non-resistance, acceptance of all life, spiritual discernment, and growth from whatever the experience is. There's no bad experience. They're just opportunities to grow. That is how you start using life, what seems good and what seems bad, the wheat and the tares. You use it all as grist for the mill, so that eventually you will have faith from the actual experiences. You'll just know quicker and quicker that it's all okay. You don't need to deny anything. You shouldn't deny anything. You just, as Course in Miracles says, start seeing things and people differently as grist for the mill to learn from. And you burn up the weeds at the appropriate time after you've learned from the experience. You haven't denied anything. And then more and more, you will save wheat in your barn. And you'll then develop even more faith to know that no weeds ever need ruin a minute of your life, certainly not your whole field. Like Voltaire so famously said, we must all cultivate our garden. So go home today and start cultivating your garden, your life, knowing that it is all good.